Nous avons parlé des États-Unis, mais le problème est global. Oui. Il est aujourd'hui planétaire. Comment approchez-vous ce phénomène aujourd'hui?
Well, first of all, there are some United Nations treaties that address this globally. The Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants addressed some pesticides, and they established a mechanism by which these persistent pesticides would be withdrawn from the market and eliminated. It's not perfect. It takes a long time. Sometimes countries want to protect their own industry so they don't cooperate with it. But there are mechanisms like that. And the reason why this convention was put in place is because, by definition, this is not a local problem. If a compound is persistent, it often winds up evaporating into the atmosphere, and it's carried all over the world. There's a commonly used pesticide in the United States. It's not used in Switzerland, even though it's produced by Syngenta. Used widely in the United States, widely in the European Union, in many other countries. It's called atrazine. And if you measure rainwater, put a bucket out, catch rainwater, and you measure atrazine in that rainwater, you can detect it 600 miles away from the point of application because it went into the clouds and it was carried and it rained. And the levels you can find in rainwater are enough to cause biological effects. So this is not a local problem. We know that the problem varies, though, from country to country because different countries approach the necessary solutions in different ways. Probably the worst example right now are several of the South Asian countries, India and China. You go into a supermarket or the local market where they sell produce, and you can find very high levels of pesticides in many of them. In China right now, senior officials sometimes have their own organic farms where they can get produce that's safe, whereas everyone else doesn't have access to it. That's not fair. But, you know, the problem isn't only in China or India.
Mais excusez-moi, vous soulevez là une question très importante. La Chine, aujourd'hui, sur le plan démographique, est le plus grand pays du monde et c'est celui qui est peut-être le moins prudent en la matière. Donc la situation est grave.
So China does have big problems, and the leadership recognizes that because if you follow the news from China, you see protests about chemical factories in neighborhoods making people sick. There are rivers famous for causing cancer in China. You see protests over contaminated food because the market is not even remotely regulated sufficiently to protect people from vendors taking shortcuts and including dangerous materials in food that then make it into the marketplace and make people sick. There are some classic examples. One with a milk product that was used in China. They substituted an industrial material. A lot of babies got very sick. That actually had consequences in Switzerland because all of a sudden Nestle had a huge run on its milk powder for babies. And so that then put a stress into the marketplace, making it hard for other countries, other people to actually get the milk powder that they needed. But you know, this is not just China's problem. It's not just India's problem. It's a problem here in Switzerland. It's a problem in the US. It's a problem in virtually every country in the world. Take Switzerland.
Allons-y, parlons de la Suisse.
Yeah.
La Suisse n'est pas forcément exemplaire en la matière. Il y a aussi des problèmes.
Yeah. Imagine driving along the Rhone River Valley and you see those beautiful vineyards. I love that site. Except that I've also seen it when the helicopters are flying over, spraying those vines. And if you look carefully, you'll see a mist behind the helicopter that's spreading. It's going into nearby homes, it's going into nearby villages, and it's contaminating drinking water. And because of an odd phenomena that most people aren't aware of, these chemicals often, when it's hot in the spring or summer, they evaporate. They move into the clouds, and as the clouds are carried up the side of the mountain, they get cooler and it rains. And so the areas in the highlands around the Rhone River Valley can be even more contaminated than sites adjacent to the fields.
Et là, ce sont les vaches qui
Yeah.
sont contaminées.
Yeah. So these are problems we have to fix. I think we can. I think that especially a problem like that needs to be addressed through better regulation, because if you're living in the village, there's nothing you can do about the pesticides that are coming through your window being sprayed by a helicopter unless someone says no to the helicopter. Okay? I think it's likely that some of the areas of dairy farming here in Switzerland are more contaminated than people believe, because they look up at the mountainside, they see the cows up there on those beautiful green fields. They don't realize that the pesticides have been carried up like that.
Ce qui veut dire que selon vous, à partir de ce moment-là, avec ce problème, les décisions deviennent politiques, gouvernementales. Il y a des décisions à prendre pour limiter ce type d'action.
Many of these decisions are political because citizens don't have the knowledge or the ability to protect themselves. These require societal solutions, which means politics. I don't know the details in Switzerland. I know that in the United States, when it enters into that political arena, the companies that want to protect their products, their pesticides, go to great lengths to stop regulation from happening. All sorts of practices, they can be very effective, but we can't let that happen if we want to move into the future I was describing earlier, where the next generation of kids becomes healthier, which is where we need to go.
Merci, Dr Myers. Nous tiendrons au courant et nous suivrons évidemment avec beaucoup d'attention vos prochaines publications. Merci à vous.